So, let me know when you're filming. Excellent. So today we are really excited to have with us Michael Espinoza from Press Democrat and a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter. And this is the first of our kind of three-part series on the fires that happened last year. And we have some really fantastic, amazing first moments reporting that was done. And we're going to listen to that right now. Following up, our next talk will be from a person who was polluted by the fires, so she's going to get to come back and talk about that experience. And then we will have a talk on drone photography that was also used during the reporting on these fires. So, without any further ado, I will pass the stage.
Hello. So I've been asked to do a talk on what our paper did last year around this time on the fires, but I wanted to just tell a little bit about myself and the work that I've done before that. So I'm originally from Sacramento. Oh, you can't hear me? Huh. So can you hear me okay on the mic here? Yeah. Okay. So I'm originally from Sacramento. I was born and raised there. I studied mechanical engineering at Sac State. I didn't study journalism. I didn't get into that until after I left engineering. I only worked as an engineer for about a year. And my first job was when I moved to San Francisco, and I got a job at a newspaper called The Bay Guardian. And it was an alternative news weekly that recently, a few years ago, shut down. I worked there through the 90s. I met my ex-wife there. I did about a 3-year, toward the end of the 90s, I went to Mexico, and Central Mexico, I freelanced there for about 3 years. Then my ex, she moved to New York to get a master's degree at NYU, and I followed her. She followed me first to Central Mexico, and then I followed her. So in New York, I arrived around early 2001. And after 9/11, we lived in Jersey City, which is just across the Hudson River from Manhattan. And so after 9/11, I got a job at a scrappy little newspaper in Jersey City called the Jersey Journal. And 9/11 was my first big disaster. I was freelancing at the time that it happened, but afterward, about 3 weeks after, I realized that I really should get on a paper. The Jersey Journal was my first daily newspaper. Before that, I'd only worked for and freelance for weeklies. I fell in love with the daily newspaper model. After that, it was just such a fast pace. The aftermath, we wrote about the 9/11 aftermath for about 3 years. I mean, I did. And then in 2004, I quit, and I wanted to come back to California, and that's when I got the job at the Press Democrat. So I've been at the Press Democrat for 14 years now, almost 15. It's been a good paper for me. It's been, I'm the healthcare reporter, and I also cover immigration, census, and demographics. In 2008, I was able to go, back when the New York Times owned our paper, I got a chance to be a visiting fellow at the New York Times. So I got to go work at the New York Times in 2008 for about 4 months in the latter part of the year during the elections. That was also an amazing experience. It was the absolute worst butterflies I ever felt in my life, because I didn't want to get it wrong. I didn't have to run a correction. I don't know if you guys are familiar with newspapers, but the worst thing you can do is to have to run a correction. And I didn't want to do that. I had a few dozen stories in the New York Times, and it was just an amazing experience for me. And then there was October. For me, the 9/11 was a pretty big deal, not only for the New York metro area, but for the entire country. But the October fires hit me in a more personal way, because it hit home. I mean, I didn't really live in New York. It was to me, it was kind of a national tragedy, and it was shared that way. But this one was really personal, even though 3,000 people died during 9/11. Not that many people died, but it just, to me, it was just more of an emotional ordeal, psychological as well. So I want to get to the slides here. And I just want to talk a little bit about what it was like before the fire and then after. So before the fire, we would get these types of alerts. We have traffic delays because of a bike event, minor traffic delays, traffic lights at Stony Point are flashing due to a gas line. So I was not used to this. So on Sunday around 10:52, and these are screenshots from my phone, was the first that I heard about the fires. And it was just multiple fires reported around Sonoma County. I clicked on the Nixle, on the little link, and that gave me a little more information, and I posted that on my Facebook page. And my editor, well, I want to take you back. Again, this is pre-October 8th, where he would text me and say, "You forgot to fill out your time card. Are there any oddities?" "No, sick day Wednesday. I'll take care of it, thanks." And then just before 12 o'clock, he texted me, "Are you still up?" And so he must have seen the post that I made on Facebook because he knew that I was posting things. And by that time, we were already looking for reporters to go out there. We had a photographer, Kent Porter. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him. He's like a legend in the area. He briefly worked as a volunteer firefighter before he became a journalist, a photographer. He was out there since 10 o'clock, I believe, 10:30. He was already in Calistoga following the fire as it was headed over this way. I don't know if I should do this right now, but I want to run some of the video that I did that night, but I'll get to that in a minute. So this is from the submission that we entered to the Pulitzers earlier in the year, and it sort of documents what we did that night. Kent, it says there that at 10 o'clock he was awakened by the wind scanners, and he just, whenever he hears something that's serious on the scanner, he's just out the door, and he heads to wherever it is. So that's an early shot that he took of the fire up there. Where is that? Near supposedly it's up there near Tubbs. And this was our first story we posted. I'm gonna get the pointer here. Our first story was written by a news editor, this one here, just a little tiny thing that we gleaned from different sources, and we didn't have a reporter in the newsroom until about, was it 2 o'clock? Those first few hours, I was just trying to figure out how bad it was. Kent Porter was already saying that it was going to be worse than the Valley Fire, if any of you remember that one. It happened in 2015. I had a chance to cover that one as well. I'd never seen anything like the Valley Fire. Some of those neighborhoods just where they're completely just a wasteland. And Kent was saying it's going to be worse than that. And I couldn't believe him. I told my editor, "You know Kent," because he relayed that to me. I said, "Well, you know Kent, he kind of exaggerates sometimes." But he was right. So that night, I had to figure out what to do with my son because my ex was out of town. And also, I was just worried about waking him. I wasn't sure how bad it was, which is crazy because at 1 o'clock in the morning, people are already dying, and we still don't know how bad it was. And many people are still asleep. So it just, in an age where, information is instantaneous, it just blows my mind that it could be 1 o'clock, people could be dying, and I'm still trying to figure out how bad it is. And I didn't want to wake him up unless it was really, really serious. And I also didn't want to wake up my neighbors because by that time I already started thinking, God, I should start waking people up. I live in Rincon Valley in Santa Rosa, off Calistoga Road. And the fire did get up into Rincon Valley, but it just stopped on the northern edge and burned a few dozen homes in that area. So by about 2:30 or 3, there was no denying how bad it was. The sky was full of ash was falling from the sky. It was all smoky. The sky was glowing to the north, and so I tell this story where I actually tried to wake up my neighbors 3 times. The first time I got halfway across the street and I couldn't do it. I didn't know. The second time I actually got up to their door and I almost knocked and I said, no, it's not that bad. So I turned around and went back in and just was tracking the whole thing on the scanner, on the police scanner on my phone and on Facebook. And then the third time is when I finally knocked and got them up. And so everybody started evacuating and we left, and I got my son to my sister-in-law's house in the College District in downtown Santa Rosa. I went around the corner to see if Julie Johnson, one of the reporters, was up. She's a breaking news reporter, and she had already gone to work, so I just went to work. And it was around 4 o'clock when I got there. The editors asked me to make a few phone calls, and I'm not good with, I'm not a breaking news reporter, I'm a healthcare reporter. So they wanted me to call a fire department in Sonoma Valley. They gave me a number. I got a number from Julie. I called it. It was a fire chief there who was very short with me. He said, it's really bad. A lot of homes are lost, and he hung up on me. And so I gave that to Julie Johnson, and then I saw on TV they were evacuating Kaiser. And I said, well, I'm going to go to Kaiser. And I was actually the only reporter that went out that night, which was a little surprising to me. But I knew that I was going to be worthless on the phone, so I just went out. And that day I took very few notes. A reporter's tool is his pen and his notebook. But that night I had maybe 2 pages of notes in my notebook. And everything else I did on Facebook Live. That was the only thing I did that night. You'll see that you'll see how much of a novice I was at Facebook Live. See right here? I was holding the phone like this instead of this way. But my Facebook Live videos were part of the submission for the Pulitzer. And so I think I'll just run some of the video. Let's see. Oh, it's no internet. It shouldn't need internet, or should it?
It's not on your machine.
Yeah, I know what to do. I hope. There should be. Here it is. Can you see that?
Like, it's not coming through your...
Well, hold on. It's actually playing on my computer, but it's not playing up there. Maybe it's
Right.
because I have to back out of this thing.
Santa Rosa and
No, that's the problem with. Yeah, we're gonna have a little problem
Maybe have an account for you,
for
for the internet.
yeah. You know what? I could take a few questions while I set this up at this point, but Wi-Fi on. Which one is it? Is it SU?
It's W,
It's that one.
yeah.
No. Oh, it's registered user. It's asking for my ID. No,
Right.
just Martin.
Yep.
And then the password. It's MXQM7702.
That's right.
So if this works. Authentication successful.
Great.
Why is this? It's jumping to a different window.
Oh, and not showing up there.
And it's
Is it accessible on the web anywhere because I can get it?
if you can get it, yeah. It's can you transmit it? If I email it to you right now?
Yeah, that would be great. So why don't we, while he's emailing it, we can maybe ask a couple questions and then I'll transfer it up onto the screen.
All right, so what's your email?
And John.Sullins@Sonoma.
It's John.Sullins?
Yep.
.Sullins
@Sonoma.edu.
at sonoma.edu. Sorry about this. All right.
Okay, so does anybody have any questions?
So-
I'll pull this up and.
Did anybody lose a home or here?
Did you lose anybody in the fires? Like, have anybody that were affected by it?
We at the paper we had about 10 people that lost homes, but nobody in the newsroom. So nobody had an excuse not to come to work. But yeah, we had about 10 people in the media company that owns the newspaper lost homes, and you'd expect that. I mean, it's 3,000 homes in Santa Rosa.
What would you say was the most important reporting on this for you?
Was being out there during the fires. So when I got out there, it was around 4 o'clock when I left for the Kaiser parking lot, and I'll just talk a little bit about that. I went on top of the parking lot and I started videotaping Journey's End, that mobile home park that was destroyed. And while I was up there, there were people who were watching their trailers burn. And so I was up there interviewing them. I was videotaping. There were propane tanks going off. People had ammo in their homes that was going off. You could hear whizzing bullets sometimes. It wasn't so much scary as it was just overwhelming. And seeing that much fire, that much destruction was just heartbreaking. From the Journey's End, from that parking lot, you could see across Highway 101, and that just blew my mind that it was burning on the other side of Highway 101. And then while I was at the Kaiser parking lot, I ran into Kent Porter, the photographer. And Kent had already been to the origin of the fire. He'd already been to Fountain Grove, he'd already been to Coffee Park, and he'd already been to Sonoma Valley. So he came back to shoot some of the evacuation, which was, I mean, he worked, just really was amazing how much work he did. By the time he met up with me, like I said, he had already been to a lot of the burn zones, and then he asked me if I wanted to go with him to go back to some of them. So after I got in his car, and we drove to Coffee Park, and then we drove to Fountain Grove. And that's most of the video that I did that night.
So you want to play that?
Yeah, let's just play it. I mean,
Okay.
my son, he used to go to a school in Windsor, and so I used to drop him off at a house in Fountain Grove where one of his classmates lived. And so every day I'd either drop him off at the house or pick up his classmate and drive them.
From the sublime to the ridiculous. Right? I can't find my clicker.
Hitching a ride. Okay.
Oh my God. Oh, I have a better solution. There's a better solution. Okay.
Okay. So.
That's the weird thing about YouTube, right, is you have all this powerful moving video and just the most ridiculous, crazy stuff as well.
From current slide. Well, see, so I don't know why that's up there. Anyway,
It's still your slideshow.
that's, oh, you know what it is? It's Google.
Right, it looks like our Google Slides.
For some reason, it's not getting rid of it. Oh. All right, so let's just.
Perfect.
All right. So again, that's a photo of, I think we're up in Fountain Grove, and I'm with Kent. And the next day, they sent me, this was still October 9th in the morning. So what I did was that night, after I did the Facebook Live, I got back to the newspaper when the sun came up, and I started writing everything, whatever feed, I was giving it to another reporter, whatever, just from memory, and then going back to some of the quotes that were in the video, I was putting that into text, and then I fed that to another reporter. And then I went back out that morning to it's a little hill, it's a little residential area right across from the Home Depot, that little shopping center up there, but it's on the other side of Bicentennial. So I went up there. These people, this guy and a bunch of other residents up there were trying to keep the fire from coming up the hill. This was right next to the Rayleighs, I think it is there, next to the Home Depot. That whole complex burned down. So this was still October 9th in the morning. There's a woman getting out of there with her stuff. So I stayed pretty much all day out there. I came back around 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon to write my story. And so this was Monday evening, toward the evening after I had already filed my story. That's me in the orange hat. There were still not a lot of people in the newsroom. Some people were still out, but these were kind of the core that worked that day. I had dropped my son off at my sister-in-law's house, and she got really freaked out. She and her roommate, they wanted to drive to Marin, to the coast, to get away from the smoke. But I told, and they had my son, but I said, no, you're not going to get on the freeway with him. You can go, but you're not going to take him. So they dropped him off at the newspaper. And then after work, when it was over, I finally left around, 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock. And we went back to the house. It was not under an evacuation at the time. So we went back to my house, and he wanted to ride his bike. So I let him ride it for a while before we went. I can't even remember where we slept that night. It might have been at the house, might have been somewhere else. My messy desk at the time. I don't know why I took that picture. We on Tuesday was when I was doing the end of that video was when we went up to Fountain Grove, and that was my story that they wanted me to do a story about the destruction in Fountain Grove. And so they wanted me to do some kind of an assessment of all the damage that was done, which was, I thought, okay, that's the editor, that's editor think, let's just. And so when I got there, I said, and he called me and he says, so what do you got? Getting close to deadline. I said, well, it's all gone. He says, what do you mean? What streets? How many houses? How many houses? I said, there's no way, I can't. It is literally all gone. I can tell you how many houses are still standing. But it was just, we had no script for that. I don't know if you've seen those aerial views of these neighborhoods. Any one of those blocks, if it had burned in a fire, that would have been in the newspaper for about a month. If it was an apartment complex, we'd have written about that for several weeks. We had no script for this. It was difficult to try to logistically tackle coverage of something like that. And this is literally all we've been writing about for about a year. For a year, it's been this. And then we try to. I think it was on the front page until the end of the year. I found this. Somebody propped up that little Buddha. I posted that on Facebook, and people were just going crazy. They needed some kind of something positive. For a long time, I was evacuated from my house 3 times. 3 times from Monday to Saturday. The Saturday evacuation, because of the Oakmont fire, was the longest. And so I was carrying all my most precious stuff, as you can see my Ludwig snare drum there, in the back of my truck. And that's how I was living for a while. And one of the things about being evacuated many times from your house is it starts to feel like it's not a safe place. And that's a really messed up thing when your house does not feel safe, because your house is, that's where you want to feel safe. It's where you go to sleep and and you just feel like nobody's going to come in. I was afraid to go back to my house, which was kind of a freaky thing. And this was I think it's weeks after the fire. My neighborhood in Piedmont Heights and everything east of Calistoga Road, near Maria Carrillo, was evacuated because of the Oakmont fire, which actually merged with the Nuns fire. So that's what we saw all the time. My last slide it's not the wine country fires. One of the things that really kind of irked me around that time is newspapers like the Chronicle and the San Jose Mercury News were calling it the wine country fires. And it irritated me, because that is a kind of perspective from somebody that views this area as their backyard, their leisure, where they come to drink, to sip wines. But this was not a vineyard. It burned homes, it burned neighborhoods, it burned trailer parks. And so I knew when they started calling it the wine country fire that we had a different perspective. It was in our backyard. It was a very personal thing for us to cover. For them, they would parachute in here and they would go back. By the time, after a month or two, they stopped covering it, and we just kept going on and on and on. So in March, the award season starts around the springtime for journalism, and there are 3 really big awards. There's the Scripps. There's one called ASME, American Association of something or other editors, and the Pulitzer. These are huge national awards. We lost the first one to the Chronicle, and that was the Scripps. And none of us really thought about whether or not that was even a possibility. Winning a prize like the Pulitzer. That was not the reason we wrote those stories. That was not the reason that we went out there that night, and then in the weeks to follow it and the months that followed. But when we were nominated for the Scripps, we thought, oh boy, it's maybe. And we would even joke about it, but there would always be somebody who would say, don't even go there. The second one, the ASME, we actually won. And so that's when I thought, oh God, no way. Do you really think it's possible? We had a party the weekend before the Pulitzers were announced, and in the Pulitzers you don't know who's nominated. But the weekend before they were announced, we had a party, and I organized with another reporter to go get some beers at a local bar not far from the paper. And it was just sort of, we called it a consolation, or a party to kind of keep our spirits up because we're not going to get it. And I kept telling myself that whole weekend, the Chronicle's going to get it, the Chronicle's going to get it. Because I didn't want to be that disappointed. I tell you, it's when it actually happened, you had mixed feelings about it. Because this was, for me, it was the proudest moment of my career, and it was one of the happiest next to my son being born. But it was because of a fire that just took out 5% of the housing stock in Santa Rosa, killed 24 people here in Sonoma County, 40 plus people if you count all of the fires that made up the North Bay fires. So it's hard to reconcile yourself with that, with feeling that good about something that was so horrible. But we, I still can't reconcile myself with it. Anyway, that's it. I can take questions or comments.
One thing that I want to make sure that we talk about before we run out of time is, you're just hitting on it here with your last few comments, and that is, how well are you prepared as in your journalism career for dealing with reporting on disasters where people's lives are destroyed? Like, is there ever a point where you just sort of draw the line? I'm not going to tell that story. I'm going to tell that story in a different way in order to protect the emotions of these people that are going through it.
Usually when somebody dies, usually when it's a disaster, whether it's a disaster or something like a murder or a fatal accident, a car accident, there's this period of grief, and that you really kind of have to respect that. You want to try to find somebody who will speak for the family or not, but you have to try to reach out to them, because the last thing you want to do is have a story where they didn't get the opportunity to say something. Because sometimes they want to. Most of the times, right after it happens, they don't want to talk. After they see a story that is related, then they'll want to talk. The bad thing is, when you're working for a daily newspaper, yesterday's news is no longer, if they wait too long, then it's not news anymore for the community. It's a horrible thing to say, but I think a lot of times people are just are too grief-stricken to share, to express. But then after that period is over, they really want to. Many times they want to. Sometimes they don't ever want to. So you just have to respect those. You have to give them the opportunity.
Was there any finalized reason that started with the fire?
They have come to conclusions about most of the fires. They still haven't released a cause for the Tubbs fire, which was the most destructive, the one that burned the northern Santa Rosa, the one that came from Calistoga. The other ones, I think a lot of them, don't quote me, but a lot of them were caused by PG&E power lines. This one, which again was the most destructive and probably the costliest, the jury's still out, I guess. But I don't see why it would be any different. Have all those other fires caused by wind, knocking down power lines, or trees knocking them into power lines, and why the Tubbs fire would be different. Maybe it was.
What do you think the power of the press was in this scenario? Is the affectation to the people who suffered and the greater results of this coverage?
The power of the press. I'm not sure. I'm told that a lot of people were turning to the Press Democrat for things like where to get help, where to, where the evacuation centers are. But I saw a lot of other press doing that as well. It was mostly like a sounding board. It was we tried to let people know the extent of the damage, who was affected. There were a lot of people in here. I think the Chronicle dumped around 100 reporters here. That's bigger than our entire staff. Is that right? That can't be possible. I think I heard my editor say that. But I think everybody was just trying to get information, you know. I don't know that it was, to me it felt pretty chaotic, but you show up and you think, like, what don't we know? What do we want to know? What does everybody else want to know? What was affected? And you just try to go at it that way. One of the biggest things for me that came up right away was mental health, because I'm the healthcare reporter, and I've done a lot. I had just finished a project with the University of Southern California, taking a look at the lack of psychiatric emergency services in Sonoma County. And so I had all these contacts around mental health, and it became apparent that a lot of people were really messed up over this, us included. So I just started to look at that, and those stories resonated with a lot of people who started calling me and responding and saying, you know, I can't sleep at night, I just can't get this out of my head, it's just... And the story that I did in today's paper was trying to get an assessment of how many people have left. I had to do some estimates. I don't know if they're correct. They're about as precise as I can be. Last year, Santa Rosa annexed Roseland, the Roseland neighborhood, and a couple of other unincorporated parts of the county. And that annexation added 7,400 people. But according to estimates by the California Department of Finance, last year it only added 400 people, counting the new people from Roseland. So that doesn't make sense. The population should have grown 7,000 something, not 400. So it just tells you that possibly those people are no longer, those people left Santa Rosa, went to some other part of the county, or left the county altogether. And so I had to find all these people that have actually left the county altogether. And so we estimated around 7,000 residents. The population of the city declined by 7,000. Again, most of them are in other parts of the county, but a lot of them come next year when the insurance money runs out for their rent, and they still can't rebuild, and they're just going to cash out. So next year is going to be really hard. It's just going to keep going. Did you have a question?
Yeah, so you said you were a reporter on health.
Healthcare.
So with 9/11, I've heard that there are long-term effects on people's health due to debris and ashes. Have you heard anything about possible long-term health effects from fire?
I haven't started looking at that. That's one of the things I want to look at. One of the people that I profiled in my story today used to live. Her house didn't burn. She lived in Larkfield. Her house did not burn down, but the houses southeast of hers. I mean, she was like right on the line, on the edge of the fire in the Larkfield area. And so she just got tired of living in a moonscape. She was afraid for her two kids. She's got a 5 and 11-year-old. And she left because she couldn't find anywhere else to live in the county. She couldn't, and I don't know, she works in healthcare. She's got decent money, but it just became so hard to find another rental or to find another house, and she didn't want to live there. So they sold their house and they left because of all the ash, I mean, it wasn't just trees that burned or wood structures, it was everything that's inside a house, all those chemicals, all the plastic. I mean, all that stuff was gone completely, incinerated, and it's still in the ground or in the air. So I don't know. I think it might be too early to tell right now.
All right, well, time heals all wounds. It also ends all conversations, so let us thank Martin.